Hi there. So in this video we're going to change a water pump on a Volkswagen Polo engine. You can see here all I'm going to do to start with is take off the induction pipes and the air filter. I have sped the footage up to 2 times the speed. If it goes too fast for you, then you can always just slow it down in the YouTube settings. On the induction pipes I've taken off there are O-rings that seal them, so make sure you do change the O-rings on the induction pipes before you put them back in. So now we're just taking the breather pipe off the turbo. And now we start taking off the coolant hoses. Now we're going to remove the wiring loom to get it out of the way so we don't damage any of the connections. Now we've just removed the 2 bolts for the water pump pulley belt cover. And then we pull the cover off. You can see here on this cover the water pump has been leaking for a long time. So all that's left now is to remove the bolts that are securing the old water pump in place.
And you build up that even if Adam comes back.
And then the water pump will now pull off in one piece along with the belt.
Wow. That has been leaking for a while.
So again, as I said earlier, you can see here this water pump has been leaking for a long time from the build-up and the crystallisation there of the coolant. You can't see very well in the video, but when I do the bearing there on the water pump, the bearing has actually started to fail. There was quite a lot of play there and it's been leaking from the seal behind the bearing. So all I'm going to do now is clean up the side of the engine and take off the old coolant and any other dirt and gunk that's got behind there. Now there has been a lot of coolant on the rubber belt that we took off for the water pump. You don't actually have to change the belt. The coolant doesn't affect the rubber in any way. Volkswagen have said that the coolant doesn't damage the belts, you don't need to replace it. But for me, for peace of mind, I would always change the rubber belt at the same time. So all I'm using there is brake cleaner and some brushes. And then I'm putting the new water pump on and the belt on there as well. You may have noticed there isn't actually a tensioner for the water pump. You tension it on the water pump housing itself, which I will show you in a minute. To start with, we just put the bolts for the water pump back in and we do them up finger tight. So that big Allen key there's a hex socket that you can place the Allen key inside, and with the torque wrench, we set the torque wrench to 30 Newton meters. And then with that set to 30 Newton meters and under tension, that turns, and that's what tensions the belt for the water pump itself, so it's not too loose. And then you then proceed to tighten all the bolts up for the water pump. So I do them all up by hand first, and then I torque them up with the torque wrench afterwards. And then we just pop the cover back on after cleaning that as well. And now it's time to put all the rubber hoses back on. So basically the rest of the installation is just a reverse of the removal. We'll clip the wiring loom back in. And then we put the servo part back in, so I'll just put a little bit of lube on there and then clip that back in, make sure it sits home. And then we put the breather pipe back on. And then we put the induction pipes back on with the new O-rings fitted. And there we go, that's the airbox back on, and the induction pipe last of all. And then we bleed the cooling system. So I'm using a vacuum bleeder here. This sucks all the air out of the system and then draws new coolant in. We're using genuine Volkswagen coolant. This is G13 coolant, and I've done it to a 50-50 mix, which usually works out to about minus 35 degrees. And then once we've filled it up, we just remove the excess coolant. I always leave the level a little bit above, just so there might still be some air in it. It can take about 150 miles for it to get out of the system. And that's it, we're done.